You know what's intriguing? This idea of a superhero team that, well, isn't exactly packed with heroes, right?
Mm.
We're diving straight into all the buzz around the upcoming Thunderbolts movie. Think a squad of anti-heroes,
Mm.
maybe some reformed villains, maybe not so reformed. Definitely sounds like a recipe for, unpredictable stuff.
Absolutely.
And you're here because you want the lowdown, the key info, maybe some surprising facts about this film, but without wading through tons of articles.
Exactly. We want to cut through the noise.
That's exactly what we're going to do.
Yep. We've taken a hard look at everything out there, announcements, casting news, but also digging into the comic book origins of this whole concept.
Okay.
Our goal here is to give you a really sharp, clear picture of what Thunderbolts is shaping up to be
Right.
and why it landing in the Marvel Cinematic Universe could really shake things up.
Okay. So Thunderbolts. Even the name sounds a little different for the MCU, doesn't it?
It does. It signals something else.
Our sources, they really seem to stress the timing. This is happening after the big universe-altering events of the Infinity Saga.
That context is crucial here.
We're looking at a world where the main protectors, the Avengers, they're kind of scattered, dealing with their own fallout. They're not the instant go-to anymore.
And think about what that means, that absence. It creates kind of security vacuum, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And maybe a need for different kinds of solutions when new threats pop up. Solutions from, let's say, less conventional sources.
Right, which seems to lead, according to what we've gathered, to some kind of government initiative.
Mm-hmm. Probably spearheaded by Valentina Allegra de Fontaine,
Huh.
pulling together a team for those messier situations.
The morally ambiguous ones.
The ones the Avengers maybe couldn't or wouldn't touch.
A deniable asset, basically. Something the government can use and then pretend they didn't, if needed.
Pretty much. Which, immediately brings up big moral questions.
Oh, definitely. Can you actually trust people with, let's call them checkered pasts, even with amazing abilities to do the right thing?
Or a right thing. Maybe not the right thing.
Ha, good point. That whole tightrope walk, that's where the comic history gets really interesting, isn't it?
It really does. Because Thunderbolts, the concept, it isn't brand new for Marvel fans. The comics explored this territory way back.
Okay, tell us about that.
Well, the original 1997 launch was, frankly, brilliant. You had this team of completely new heroes burst onto the scene.
Right, filling the void.
Exactly. Seemingly squeaky clean heroes, only for the big reveal, the shocker, that they were actually the masters of evil in disguise.
Wow, no way.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
Their whole hero act was just a ploy, a calculated move to gain public trust so they could eventually make their real move. There's a huge twist.
Talk about a rug pull. So that deception angle was key initially.
Very key. But then, later versions of the team in the comics took different approaches.
How so?
Well, some focused more on actual villains trying to reform, maybe genuinely, maybe not. Others were more like government operatives with, let's say, flexible ethics. And some were just straight-up anti-heroes.
Okay, so different flavors over the years. Any familiar names from the comics?
Oh, yeah. You have people like Baron Zemo leading for a while. Songbird was a mainstay. Even Hawkeye led a version of the team.
Hawkeye, really?
Yeah. And characters we know well now from the MCU, like Bucky Barnes, the Winter Soldier, and Yelena Belova, have been part of comic Thunderbolts teams, too.
Interesting. So the comics really played with ideas of trust, redemption, manipulation.
All of that. What heroism even means. Which makes you wonder, which comic storylines might be influencing this movie version.
Right, because the MCU often remixes comic ideas.
Exactly. It feels like they're drawing from a few different eras of the comics. This idea of a government-backed team for shady missions definitely clicks with some of those later comic runs.
So based on all that, what's the likely premise for the MCU movie shaping up to be? You hear the Suicide Squad comparisons, obviously.
You do. And there's an element of truth there. A team of difficult individuals sent on dangerous missions. But, it'll have that Marvel spin.
Of course.
It really seems like Valentina is the linchpin, assembling this crew for tasks that are too politically sensitive or morally gray for, say, Captain America.
High risk, low profile kind of stuff.
Probably.
Yeah.
And operating in those gray areas where maybe the ends justify the means.
Yeah.
At least in the eyes of whoever's giving the orders.
And you've got to imagine the team dynamics. A bunch of self-interested, potentially volatile people forced to work together.
Oh, the potential for internal conflict is huge. Think about it. Yelena's pragmatism versus Bucky's whole redemption arc. What does success even look like to each of them on a mission?
That could be explosive.
It could. And it raises that fundamental question. Can these characters actually find redemption on this team? Or are they just tools being used?
Good question. Now, you see it online sometimes, people asking, are the Thunderbolts basically the new
Right,
Avengers?
that comparison comes up.
But our sources suggest that's probably not the right way to think about it.
No, it's a really important distinction to make. The Avengers, they're established public figures, generally trusted.
Symbols, almost.
Right.
Yeah.
The Thunderbolts seems like they'll be the opposite. Clandestine, morally questionable, probably viewed with a lot of suspicion if the public even knows they exist.
Operating in the shadows. Different leadership, different rules, probably different kinds of threats, too.
Exactly. They're likely dealing with stuff that needs a more surgical, maybe deniable approach than fighting giant space robots. It's about managing expectations.
And that secrecy, that ambiguity, it fuels a lot of the fan theories, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. People are speculating like crazy. What kind of missions will they tackle?
Will someone betray the team? Seems likely with this lineup.
You'd almost expect it, wouldn't you? Shifting alliances, hidden agendas. It feels baked into the concept.
And how does it connect to everything else going on in the MCU? There have got to be threads pulling from other shows and movies.
No doubt. And then there's the tone question. Is it going to be super dark and gritty?
Yeah.
Action comedy, espionage thriller?
Maybe a mix.
Could be. The MCU likes to blend tones. Maybe something like Winter Soldier's political thriller vibe, but with bursts of Guardian-style humor, especially with certain characters involved.
Speaking of characters, let's get into the roster. First up, Florence Pugh as Yelena Belova. She's already made a big impact.
Huge impact. We met her in Black Widow, saw her motivations explored more in Hawkeye.
Yeah.
She's clearly central here.
And we know what she brings.
Uh-huh.
Elite assassin skills, hand-to-hand weapons master.
Yep. But it's that moral compass, or maybe lack of a traditional one, that makes her fascinating for this team.
Yeah.
She has her own code, her own loyalties, but they're flexible.
Right. She does what she thinks is necessary, questionable or not.
Exactly. So her skills in combat and spying are obvious assets.
Yeah.
But imagining her interacting with someone like, say, Bucky, that's interesting.
Absolutely. Which brings us to Sebastian Stan as Bucky Barnes, the Winter Soldier. His journey's been epic.
One of the longest and most complex arcs in the MCU, for sure. From brainwashed assassin to, well, trying really hard not to be that anymore.
And his abilities are off the charts. The
Yeah.
arm, the strength, agility, marksman, all that.
But what Bucky really brings here is weight, experience. He understands manipulation, the dark side of serving a cause.
His whole struggle for atonement adds this deep layer of moral complexity to the team.
Definitely. His skills are perfect for covert ops, heavy combat, and like you said, putting him alongside Yelena, both dealing with a violent past forced upon them. That's potentially powerful stuff.
Yeah, really compelling. Okay, then we shift gears a bit. David Harbour as Red Guardian, Alexei Shostakov.
Big shift in tone, yeah.
He was such a scene stealer in Black Widow, this flamboyant, slightly past his prime Soviet super soldier.
With maybe slightly exaggerated stories of his own greatness.
Haha, probably. But he does have supposed super strength durability.
He does. But his defining traits are probably his ego and that weird nostalgic loyalty to his Soviet past. His moral compass seems uniquely his own.
Guided by Alexei Shostakov.
Pretty much. He likely thinks he's a hero, but his methods and maybe his grip on reality are, let's say, questionable. He feels like the wild card, maybe the comic relief.
You gotta have some laughs, even on a team like this. Okay, then there's Hannah John Kamen as Ghost Ava Starr.
Right, from Ant-Man and the Wasp.
Her backstory was really tragic, and her powers, that phasing ability, are really unique.
And her inclusion adds another dimension, morally. She wasn't really a villain in the traditional sense, more like someone driven to desperate measures by pain and survival. A victim, in many ways.
Makes her different from, say, Zemo.
Very different. Her phasing power is incredible for infiltration, getting past security, evasion. Huge asset.
But she also seemed quite fragile, physically and emotionally.
That's the potential conflict, isn't it? Her instability could be a major source of tension or of vulnerability for the team. It adds another layer of unpredictability.
Okay, so that's the core we know. But there's chatter about others, right? Based on who Valentina has already recruited or interacted with?
Exactly. The sources definitely float other possibilities. Yeah. You've got Daniel Bruhl as Baron Zemo.
Master manipulator. Intellect.
Then Olga Kurilenko as Taskmaster with that skill mimicry.
Could be incredibly useful.
And Y. Russell as U.S. Agent John Walker.
Ooh, now he's a firecracker. That unstable personality, but desperate to serve.
Right. Adding any of them. Zemo's cunning, Taskmaster's adaptability, Walker's volatility. It just amps up the morally gray, potentially explosive nature of this team.
It really paints a picture of a group that's anything but unified. Clashing egos, conflicting motives.
It seems almost guaranteed. How they manage to function at all will be part of the drama, I suspect.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. Summing up our deep dive on Thunderbolts, what are the key takeaways?
Well, I think number one is context.
Yeah.
This team emerges from that post-Endgame, post-blip reality in the MCU,
Oh.
a world needing different solution.
Right, operating in the shadows, not the spotlight like the Avengers.
Exactly. Number two, it's populated by characters with complex, often dark pasts and ambiguous morals. Yelena, Bucky, Ghost, Red Guardian. Not our simple heroes.
Definitely shades of gray across the board.
Number three, it's clearly inspired by various eras of the comics, particularly the idea of a government-controlled team doing dirty work, but with that unique Marvel twist we expect.
Kind of a Suicide Squad vibe, but potentially with more complex character arcs and less overt villainy.
That seems like a fair assessment, yeah. More nuance, perhaps. And finally, the known cast is just packed with potential for drama, action, and maybe even some unexpected humor.
Yeah, it sounds like a really potent mix, not your standard superhero flick.
Not at all. It feels like a chance for the MCU to really explore those murky areas of morality, redemption, necessity, what happens when the lines blur. So hopefully this deep dive gives you a solid foundation for what to expect.
Definitely helps make sense of the pieces we have so far. Okay, final thought then, something for you to chew on.
Lay it on us.
Given everything we've talked about, the shady missions, the questionable pasts, the often selfish motivations, what would a real win actually look like for this Thunderbolts team? Is it just getting the job done no matter the cost? Is it finding some kind of personal peace or redemption for someone like Bucky? Or could their success actually have some really dark, unintended consequences for the rest of the MCU down the line?
That's a great question. What does victory mean for a team like this?
Something to think about. We'll leave it there for this deep dive.